going to have to go around the room and point out some class in here for me. Hey, porcupine. The presentation you're about to see tonight I've given twice before, but this is not the same presentation because the amplifier is not the same. They also were recorded at the Greer Club and at the North Carolina DX Association. And I've had 844 views on the one video and 583 on the other. So it's a popular thing because there's not a lot of information available online necessarily about this amplifier. So that's why I wanted to record this to give an updated version for people who might be interested. So the RF kit model B26 2K plus, just kind of rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Is an amplifier that I think continues to evolve and improve. And that goes along with my motto. Okay, I stole this from Lowe's. Never stop improving. And that's something that, during an idle time when the bands aren't open, I'll sit and think, well, what could I do? What could I do to maybe make my station better or make my signal stronger? And one of those answers was moving to a legal limit 1500 watt PEP amplifier. And so this is my story about my search, my hunt, based on my criteria and how I ended up where I did. The amplifier is right up here in the front, so you can come back and take a look at it a little bit later. I call it a software-defined amplifier. It's got hardware, but it's also got computers on board, and the computers actually set the limits of the amplifier. We'll talk about that. So, came to Greenville in 2008, and shortly thereafter I joined the Greenville Club. A lot of nice people here. But then I got in with a bad crowd. I joined the Greer Club. And over there, they're DXers. They want to talk to the distant stations. And I got the bug. I wanted to talk to the DX stations as well. And I even started contesting so I could work more of them in a short period of time. And so why would I want a legal limit amplifier? To get the rare DX, and you know the definition of rare DX. DX is a foreign station from another country. Rare DX is a station from another country that you haven't worked. So I want to be able to work all of those stations. So here was my criteria. And I wanted to have a solid state, no tune, instant on amplifier. There are a number of vacuum tube legal limit amplifiers out there, but they all require generally tuning, all require filament delay. So, and I have an amplifier now, or before I bought this one, I have an Elecraft, still have it, KPA-1500. Excellent amplifier. 500 watt amplifier. So it's not at the legal limit, but that spoiled me. When I got that and got that on, I said, I want something like this. And then Dave Anderson, K4SV, the president of the Greer Club, came in one meeting and showed us an amplifier that he built, a homebrew LD-MOS amplifier, 1,000 watts with one LD-MOS device in it. And I thought, wow, that's really slick. So seeing that, I thought, well, that's something I might want to consider. I use a Flex radio. At the time when I bought the amplifier, I had a Flex 6500. I now have a Flex 6600. I moved up a notch. Beautiful radio, great receiver. Oh, but I had to be able to interface with that. Oh, and it had to be affordable. I had to be able to afford the amplifier. Oh, and it needed to have an antenna tuner just in case, I had an antenna that was out of spec or whatever to help me out there. Oh, and I operate remotely. My station is actually 25 miles north of Greenville at a vacation house that we have. And so I operate it over the internet. And the KPA-1500 with a software utility called DD-Util, I was able to do that. Fine business, it worked great. So that was another one of my criteria. I thought in contesting, one of these days I might move to something called single operator 2 radio. That's where you have one frequency in one ear and another band or frequency in the other ear, and you work them both. One running, one search and pounce. I haven't done it yet. It's a little crazy, but I might do it, so we'll see. Oh, and it had to be, did I say, affordable, because I'm a cheapskate. So in working toward this goal, I had to do a number of things ahead of time. I started replacing some low power rated antennas. I was using a high gain TH3 Junior rated at 600 watts, a Yagi. So that came down, and a K4KIO hex beam went up in its place. I added some dipole antennas, and the balance that I got for the dipoles were legal limit rated so that they could go up. I had to look at my feed lines and see, you know, is this going to work out for me? So had to plan ahead. But then the question was, and you have to remember this was a year ago, this was in 2017, which amplifier am I going to buy? Well, with my love of the KPA-1500, this was my top choice. The Elecraft KPA-1500, which is shipping now in limited quantities. But they are shipping. They did have some, as I understand it, some parts supply issues. That may be wrong, don't get, you know, but beautiful amplifier, would have fit into the shack very easily. The price, I checked today, is $5,995. Now they say they're going to make a kit version available of the amplifier, which will be a little bit less, but that's not available. And like I say, they're shipping in limited quantities. So, all right, KPA-1500, that's on my list. I use a flex radio. So you'd think I'd want to use maybe a flex amplifier. Well, flex radio in concert with SkySat 4 Oscar 3 Alpha, Renko, came up with their Power Genius XL. Beautiful amplifier. Although they ran into some issues and actually are only going to start shipping this amplifier this week. So looked at it, thought, yeah, okay, but it doesn't have an antenna tuner in it. Well, if I'd ordered this amplifier last year, Flex Radio said, we'll throw in an antenna tuner that isn't designed and isn't built yet. Okay. And the price of the Power Genius, $6,999 without a tuner. Yeah, my reaction exactly. And I looked at the Elecraft 1.5K, and saw them, and you know, this probably would have met my needs just fine. But I remember back when I used to service radios and stereos and whatnot, and only every now and again would a piece of electronics come across the service bench made in Italy. And the price, $4,995. So far, it's winning in the price category, but I wasn't sure I wanted to go with an Italian amplifier. And then along comes Michael Campbell, one of my students in last year's amateur extra class. And he said, Gary, why don't you consider that German kit? What German kit? Oh, the one they showed at Visalia. What are you talking about? You know, that $3,000 amplifier. That got my attention. 3,000 bucks, what? So I went online and took a look and at photos from Visalia, and there it was. An amplifier from Germany called RF Kit, never heard of them, and it looked interesting. Went to the website, which is both in German and in English, and okay, looked at it, okay, well, maybe, but I've never heard of this company. And then I went to their then Yahoo group. They've since moved over to groups.io, like a lot of folks have. And this is the main source of information about this amplifier, is the group, the online group. And so I started reading the posts and looking at what was going on with the amplifier. And started looking, they put some of the block diagram of the amplifier online and some of the schematics so you could take a look. And then last year, a year ago this month, I went to Dayton. Well, okay, I went to Xenia, Ohio. And lo and behold, look who's there, the RF kit people. And so I got a chance to meet the folks there, and the gentleman on the left is Reinhardt Forch, who is the main spark plug behind RF kit. He's the designer. He's the guy that is making it happen, along with his friend Tim and Chris and Mark, NU6X. He is from Sedona, Arizona. He is the American expert on this amplifier, and a really nice guy, and provides a lot of help and support, although he's not an employee of the company. I'm not an employee of the company. I'm just a user. And I took some photos of what was on display in Dayton, and came back home and talked it over with my wife. My wife, by the way, K4SAB, Sabina, is German. So this helped a little bit, because I knew I had a backup if I needed to get some translations or what does this mean, what have you, because my German is Strassendeutsch. So what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Well, August 24th, 2017, I placed the order with RF Kit. And there are some options. We'll talk about them. What I paid was 2,928 euros. This is a German amplifier, so it's priced in euros. The equivalent of $3,442 at that time. And I'll show you some current prices here in just a second. And then I had to wait. Oh, Tom Rouse. He said, Gary, that was a gutsy move. Oh. Or was it gutsy, or was it fools rush in where angels fear to tread? I didn't know. I wasn't really sure how populated the boards were going to be. I wasn't sure the assembly instructions. I mean, I took a gamble, I have to admit. But my cheapskate, the inner cheapskate, won out. So roughly 4 weeks after I placed the order, and they told me this is how they do it. They take the money first, and then between 4 and 6 weeks later, they will ship. And Reinhardt sent me an email and said, I'm shipping your amplifier today. 2 days later, it was at my door.
That's why €180 charge for shipping.
Well, yes. But 2 days later, international shipping. And it came in one big box. Well, actually, it came in 2 boxes. A box within a box, very well packaged. And when I pulled it out, this is what I saw. All the boards are fully populated and tested. Everything is mounted pretty much in place. And it looked like it was almost ready to go. But then, of course, I had to take a look at the assembly instructions. Now, the amplifier is made up of 7 parts. The power supply, a controller board, which utilizes 2 computers, a Raspberry Pi and an Arduino, the power amplifier deck, the low-pass filter board, and then an antenna tuner if you order that option, and an antenna switch, a 1x4 antenna switch. Oh, and the touch screen display on the front of the amplifier. And assembly consisted of, well, I had to go to Amazon and order 3 muffin fans and the Raspberry Pi. Those are user supplied. And I had to make 4 RF interconnections in the amplifier using some Teflon coax that they supplied. I had to build the AC power cord, and I had to drill and tap the case in order to mount the outer cover. That was not done. And those were the 4 RF interconnections. And you can see them inside the amplifier, and you can come up a little bit later and see it as well. And this was a little gimmick that they had you use to do some tuning, some setup. Oh yeah, made in Europe. So I went to go ahead and mount the fans. Oh, it's all drilled and tapped, 3 millimeter. Now, Lowe's, remember the logo, are now stocking metric hardware. Good on them. They didn't have any long stuff. So I had to resort to the source of all parts, Amazon.com. You can find anything there. And so if you need some 3 millimeter metric screws, long ones, I'm your man. There's a photo of the PA deck there on the left and the muffin fan installation on the right. And one of the muffin fans, you do have to extend the power lead a little bit. So assembly, all right, next up is calibration. And when I got the amplifier, there were 13 pages of calibration, setup and calibration. Not difficult, but you want to be careful. You need an accurate digital voltmeter, a scope probe, and a BNC adapter for your DVM would be helpful, small test leads, alignment tool, and most of the adjustments are made at the front, and I can show you when you come up. You need 2 dummy loads because you want to make a mismatch. You want to make a 25 ohm load so you can calibrate the SWR bridge. You need an RF source, 160 meters through 6. I used a Yaesu FTDX1200. You need an accurate watt meter to do the calibrations. I had an Elecraft W2, that was just fine. And you need a 240 volt source. I'll tell you why here in a sec. So this was my setup. Dummy loads and the watt meter sampler on the floor. And this was first power up. Well, it almost was first power up. When I plugged it in and turned it on for the first time, the screen was a black. I thought, oh crap, I've messed up. Oh, how am I going to live this down? What's going on? And then I looked on the back of the touchscreen board, and there's a little teeny tiny switch. And I flipped the switch, it comes alive. And when you first power it on, it goes through some own internal tests and calibrations, and the Raspberry Pi programs the Arduino and provides its software. And the software is on a little micro SD card that goes in the Raspberry Pi. So here's where the adjustments were made. It's not a great picture, but on the controller board, which is on the front panel there. And here is the amplifier making 1,500 watts into a dummy load on 15 meters on the test bench. Woohoo! Legal limit. We're there. All right. Now, I never planned on having more than one amplifier in my shack. So I have one 240 volt outlet. So I had to go back down to Lowe's, and I think Home Depot as well, and I had to make a 240 volt Y adapter in order to power both amplifiers. They don't run at the same time, and certainly RF will never go through both of them at the same time. So I think I'm safe in this regard. And interfacing is fairly simple. You can see the back panel here in the photo, and you can also take a look when you come up here as well. So controlling the amplifier, what you want to be able to do is the amplifier needs to know what frequency you're going to be operating on, so it can select the proper bandpass filter. The bandpass filters reduce harmonic emissions down to really low levels. And if you're using the antenna tuner, it'll know then what band you're operating on, and if there's a memory position for that, it'll go to that memory position. So there are 4 ways you can accomplish this. One, they call universal control. The amplifier has a built-in frequency counter. And so if you just send a DIT or a little bit of RF to the amplifier in the standby mode, it'll read the frequency, it'll set the bandpass filter, it'll set the antenna tuner memory if that's necessary. Or you can use computer-aided transceiver or CAT control, and then you have to add another connection. There's a USB connector on the back of the amplifier. Something new is something called UDP. We'll talk about that, which utilizes your logging software to send data packets over your Ethernet, over your LAN, and the amplifier will read those. And then initially they used something called PA bridge. That's been obsoleted by the UDP, but I just put it in here for completeness. So this was my first test of CAT control using a single USB, an FTDI adapter cable going to a DB9 serial and going into the back of the Yaesu transceiver. And the fact that it's all green there means that communication is happening and everything is good. When I went to then interface with the Flex radio, I had to get a second USB to a DB9 cable because the back of the Flex has just USB ports. Now I've since been told that there is such a thing, a USB to USB cable, which has internal to it 2 couplers. Anyway, I use the 2 cables and a null modem adapter. Anybody here ever set up RS-232 before? Yeah, so you know you got to get the handshaking and the data and the transmission lines talking on the right pins. So I was able to do that. And the amplifier uses the HamLib library of definitions for radio control. HamLib, you can look it up, is available open source. Unfortunately, the Flex 6000 series selection didn't work. But since the Flex radios emulate Kenwoods, when I selected a Kenwood TS50, worked just fine. Everything went green, and so you can use then CAT control. Now there was an early problem with CAT control. When you'd hit the push to talk, you'd have a half-second of delay before RF would come out. That has been fixed. PA bridge, that's the software in the upper left-hand corner. That's no longer required. So I'm not even going to talk about it. The newest, though, in the latest version of software for the amplifier is something called UDP Direct. And UDP is User Datagram Protocol, and it uses your logging software. I use the DX Lab Suites, and the Lab Suites are able to talk to the Flex radio and then transmit over the LAN information about the radio which the amplifier picks up. And so there are some settings that you need to set up. N1MM Plus, the contest software, also will do UDP. And others, N3FJP, I don't know, but any logging software that'll do that would be compatible. Another nice little thing is on board the amplifier on the Raspberry Pi is a real VNC server. It's virtual network computing, and I see this is timed out. Let me just push this up. Come on, wake up. Wake up. Okay. So what it is that you can connect to the amplifier remotely and control functions. And if you look over here on the window, I have a Google Chromebook that will operate a VNC client, and so I can control the amplifier from this laptop. And this laptop is actually connected to the amplifier via Wi-Fi, because on board the Raspberry Pi is Wi-Fi, which can be configured either as a client on a LAN or as a server. So it just works. My next project is to have this at my house here in Greenville talk over the internet directly to the amplifier, which I think should be possible. I just have to do some port forwarding. As I mentioned, it can be a client or a server, and you can log into the amplifier. So here's some background information, which was a bit difficult to glean at first. It uses a power supply from Huawei, I believe that's how it's pronounced. It's from the HPS 4000 series. The front panel switch there controls the low voltage power supplies, and the GUI, the graphic user interface on the touch screen or on your laptop, will turn on the 50 volt supply. The main output, the 50 volt supply, can deliver up to 62 amps. And there was some question initially whether the amplifier would run on 120 volts. I can say that it will. It's running on 120 volts right now, but you're limited to 800 watts output. That's the max. And this is what the power supply looks like. The power supply is tucked in on the bottom underneath the low-pass filter board. The bandpass filters, these are critical to solid-state amplifiers because you've got to make sure that the output of the amplifier is clean. Dave Anderson, with his amplifier that he put together, he got bandpass filters from W6PQL in California. And the thought was that those were the amplifiers that were in this, or those were the filters that were in this amplifier. No, it's not true. Reinhardt, actually, working with Bob Henderson, came up with a completely different scheme, and the bandpass filters are some of the best in the industry for solid-state amplifiers. Harmonic performance is just excellent. And the intermodulation products are also well down. And the specifications you're seeing here are for my amplifier. Actually, the newest amplifier is a little bit different, and I'll tell you about that here in a second. So, considerations. I thought it was funny. I thought about when I was coming here tonight, do other clubs, talk about the tools they use in their hobby? Because this is a tool. Well, if you're considering this as a possible tool, here are some things to think about. The company is new. I say it's kind of fledgling, but they're coming along. They were at Visalia again this year. They were in Orlando back in February. They're going to be in Dayton coming up in 2 weeks. So they're here. The amplifier is priced in euros, so you have to consider the exchange rate conversion. Also, you have to consider how are you going to get euros to them. In my case, my wife is a German citizen. We have a bank account in Germany. The IRS, we have to file all sorts of paperwork. But anyway, we were able to use money that we had in Germany and just transfer it to them. So that worked out fine for us. If you use a transfer service, it might add another $100 to $200, depending on what the fees are.
They don't take like PayPal or anything like that?
No. They do not, but they will take TransferWise is the service that they recommend. Interesting, the amplifier is considered an incomplete kit. Therefore, it is exempt from customs duties. And as I mentioned before, the FedEx shipping from Germany, 2 days.
Is it also exempt from type acceptance?
Yes. You are responsible. You as an amateur are responsible. Now, and that may be disputed at some point in time in the future. I can imagine Flex and Elecraft would like a more level playing field, but at the moment, it does not have FCC type acceptance. But you then are therefore responsible. This is not a Heath kit. The online group is your primary source of information. You can find PDFs there of the assembly instructions, which are updated, and the other supporting information. But I would not recommend this as a first kit to anyone. But if you're comfortable with a soldering iron, you can do this, absolutely. When I wrote this, I said there can still be errors in the manuals. I think most part they've been all corrected. Oh, and you have to do some mechanical skills. When I talked to Reinhardt, he said, yeah, I wanted everybody to have the experience of doing a little bit of work in every area of the hobby. So he consciously made the choice not to drill and tap the holes. Interesting. And they do not provide you with an AC cable. They do provide you with a connector, and you have to make your own cable up. So that's something to consider. This is a software-defined amplifier. One beautiful thing, though, is online updating now works. which it didn't with the early version software. But now there's a button on the radio, and if I was connected on the internet, I just push a button, check for new software. If there was new software, it would download it, install it, piece of cake. The antenna tuner initially on the first version of software was in the amplifier, but it didn't work. But in version 55 software, it now works for manual tuning. If you manually tune it, you can then memorize the settings. Antenna auto tune is a future feature. It's coming. They're working on it, but they want to get it right. And so I hope to hear in Dayton that they'll make an announcement that it'll come. It does not use pin diode switching for transmit and receive. The Elecraft does. The Flex radio does not. But if you're looking for QSK, full break-in on CW, this amplifier will work very fast, and it'll work on CW very well. In fact, it's been used in Germany in a number of contests and gets high marks. But listening between the dots and the dashes may or may not be possible. I'm not a CW operator. I'm a phone guy, so I didn't even have to consider that. The relays are very quiet. They switch in about 8 milliseconds, and the time from push to talk to RF power is about 15 milliseconds. So it's a really good, fast amplifier in that regard. It will operate from 120 volts with a limit of 800 watts. There still are no spec sheets, so I can't hand you a spec sheet and say this is what the amplifier is. The group hasn't developed them yet, but they will. And you are responsible for spurious emissions from the amplifier, as there is no FCC type acceptance. Version 55, the software we were waiting for. So April 2nd, the advanced software version 55 was released. Now I have to say, it was promised for Christmas. Then it was promised for Easter. Then it came out on April 2nd. So it's a software-defined amplifier. New features you kind of have to wait for. As a Flex radio user owner, I'm well used to this. This happens with them as well. So new hardware that started this year. This uses two LDMOS output devices, the BLF 188s. That's what I have in my amplifier. All new amplifiers are shipping with a different LDMOS, the 189s, which have slightly higher power output and slightly better distortion figures as well. So they've actually improved the PA deck. The IMD and the harmonic output products are better. And they're one of the few amplifiers to use this new technology as well. Here's the current pricing in euros as of March 29th. And you have some options. You can order the amplifier without an antenna tuner, so that's 2,550 euros. You can order it with an antenna tuner, that's 2,850 euros. Oh, and you have to specify an attenuator. I have a 13 dB attenuator in this amplifier. I can run 1,000 watts out with 15 watts in. I can get 1,500 watts out with about 20 watts, thereabouts. Depends on the frequency band. But if you get the 3 dB attenuator, you could take this amplifier to full legal limit with 2 watts in. So if you have a KX3, one of the low-powered Elecrafts, this will take it up to full legal limit. And shipment, the FedEx shipment, 180 euros. So here, you can barely see it in the lower right-hand corner, is the amplifier in my ham shack. And I have it on a Tektronix scope cart that I found at Shelby last year. I was walking by it, and the scope cart called to me. And I went back and said, I could use that, maybe. So for $30, I got a very nice scope cart that I've turned into the amplifier cart. I think it kind of looks sexy, robotic, what have you. I upgraded my antenna switching. This is just an aside. The people who build the flex amplifier for Oscar 3 Alpha have a wonderful switch matrix called the Antenna Genius. It has 2 radio inputs and 8 antenna outputs. And so you can actually share your antennas among 2 radios with very high isolation, or in my case with the single operator 2 radio, this is what I plan to utilize for that. And the software is on the right-hand side there. I have it controlled manually right now, but it can be automatically controlled as well. And I mentioned the Elecraft W2 watt meter. This is what I'm using for power monitoring. And I did make one modification to the amplifier. If you look, there's a little relay mounted next to the on and off switch inside, which is controlled by a 12-volt input. And that's controlled from my shack computer. That allows me to, from home here in Greenville, turn the amplifier on remotely using a Denkovi USB switch that I have out there. So, if I had it to do all over again, would I buy this amplifier? Would I recommend it to a friend? Absolutely yes. I think it's the best bang for the buck for the high frequency amplifiers that are on the market today. So I thank you very much. Oh, by the way, there is a website here. You can look, I can send you the link, where you can see where all of the amplifiers are around the world. A lot in Europe, a lot in the United States, but some as far away as China or South America. Does anybody know W4KR? Stan in Walhalla? He's got one. I sent him an email, but he never came back to me. If you ever run across W4KR, let him know. I'd like to talk to him. I'd like to find out his experience with the amplifier as well. All right, so that's the amplifier. Are there any questions?
Great use for silk cart. That looks good.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.